We would like to send out a special thanks to HelloFresh for supporting our podcast. We have teamed up together and are offering everyone in our audience $30 off your first week of deliveries when you go to hellofresh.com/cold30 and use the offer code COLD30. That's hellofresh.com/cold30 and the offer code is COLD30. Enjoy the show. April 29th, 2003. Nashville, Tennessee. 13-year-old Tabitha Tuders leaves her house for school and is last seen walking through her neighborhood towards her bus stop. Tabitha never boards the bus or arrives at school, and when she fails to return home that evening, she is reported missing. Less than 4 months later, Heaven LaShae Ross, an 11-year-old girl from Northport, Alabama, also vanishes after leaving her home to catch the school bus, and investigators look into the possibility that her disappearance might be connected to Tabitha's. Shae's remains are discovered underneath an abandoned house 3 years later, but her death remains unsolved, and Tabitha Tuders is never found. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I am your host Robin Warder, and today we will be covering two missing children's cases which took place in 2003, the disappearances of 13-year-old Tabitha Tuders and 11-year-old Heaven LaShae Ross. I have received numerous requests to feature Tabitha Tuders' case on the podcast, and this week seemed like an ideal time to cover it for several reasons. For starters, we passed the 15th anniversary of Tabitha's disappearance just a few days before this episode's release, and this coming weekend, I'm going to be appearing at CrimeCon in Nashville, and this happens to be one of the most famous missing persons cases in the history of the city. It's a pretty haunting story about a young girl who just vanished on what was supposed to be a routine school day while she was on her way to catch the bus. Months later, investigators looked into the possibility that Tabitha's case might be connected to the disappearance of another young girl named Heaven LaShae Ross. Even though she went missing in an entirely different state, there were some compelling similarities with Tabitha's case. I have no idea if Tabitha and Shae's disappearances are actually related, but they both deserve attention on this episode. I'll start off by talking about Tabitha's case, before I move on to Shae's story, and then I'll provide my analysis and theories for both of them. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which is currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold is finally on Patreon, so if you would like to support the show, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold, and for as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards from our podcast, which may include stickers and thank you cards from yours truly, early access to episodes, and bonus content. I've already sent out thank yous and shoutouts to many of our Patreons who have signed up, and we will be thanking more of you near the end of this episode. So with all that out of the way, let us now start off by examining the unsolved disappearance of Tabitha Tuders. Our story begins in Nashville, Tennessee in 2003. Our central figure is 13-year-old Tabitha Tuders, who lives with her parents, Deborah and Bo Tuders, at their home on Lillian Street. Tabitha also has two adult siblings, her brother Kevin and her sister Jamie, who is currently living in the Tuders' home with her own two children. On the morning of April 29th, Tabitha was awoken by her father on his bedroom floor. Tabitha often had a habit of coming into her parents' bedroom in the middle of the night to sleep on the floor, and this was no exception. Bo told Tabitha to get ready for school, and he left the house for work at around 7 a.m., and the last time he saw Tabitha, she was watching television. Deborah had already left for work before Tabitha woke up, and Jamie and her 2 children were still sleeping. Like she did every morning, Tabitha was planning to leave her home and walk 2 blocks to the corners of 14th and Boscobel Street in order to catch the school bus at 8 a.m., which would subsequently take her to Bailey Middle School. At around 7:50, witnesses would recall seeing Tabitha walking through her neighborhood. Her route involved turning south from Lillian Street onto 14th Street, where she would travel uphill for a bit before arriving at her bus stop at the bottom of a steep slope at the corner of Boscobel Street. According to one witness, Tabitha was reading a piece of paper in her hand as she walked, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, this would turn out to be the last confirmed sighting of Tabitha, as she never boarded the bus or arrived at school that morning. When Tabitha did not return home as scheduled that afternoon, her parents became concerned and eventually drove to Bailey Middle School, where they would learn from a teacher that Tabitha had been absent the entire day. Bo and Deborah immediately went to the police and officially reported her missing at around 6 p.m. Sadly, as is all too common in many cases involving missing children, the police initially treated Tabitha as if she were a potential runaway. Even though they did perform a search for her, an Amber Alert was not issued because there was no direct evidence of an abduction, so her disappearance did not meet the criteria. The idea of Tabitha being a runaway did not ring true for her parents at all. She had no history of running away or causing trouble. Tabitha was an exceptional straight-A student who had a perfect attendance record at her school and was also an active member of her church's choir. In addition, she had greatly been looking forward to a trip to Six Flags Amusement Park in Louisville, Kentucky, which was supposed to take place 2 weeks after she went missing. Tabitha also left behind all of her possessions, including her clothes, makeup, and $20 she had recently won at her church for memorizing the 10 Commandments, so her family feared that she had been abducted on her way to school. Even though it was only a short walk from Tabitha's home to the bus stop, the Tuders family did not live in the best neighborhood, as some of its residents were sex offenders or had criminal records. Well, it turned out that another boy had been waiting at Tabitha's bus stop at the corner of 14th and Boscobel Street on the morning she went missing, and he came forward with an interesting eyewitness account. He claimed that he saw Tabitha walking down the hill in his direction when a red car pulled up next to her and she climbed inside. The boy described the driver as being an African-American male who was between 30 to 40 years old and wearing a baseball cap. The red car then turned around and drove uphill on 14th Street in the opposite direction. According to the witness, it did not appear that Tabitha was taken against her will, which struck her family as odd, since they didn't believe she would have willingly gotten into a vehicle with someone who wasn't a member of her family. When police used tracking dogs to trace Tabitha's scent through the neighborhood, they came to an abrupt stop on 14th Street at a point halfway down the hill near the corner of Boscobel Street. In other words, it was the exact spot where the boy claimed he saw Tabitha climb into the red car. The tracking dogs then turned around and started tracing Tabitha's scent up the hill until they came to a stop at an alley, a location which Tabitha would have been unlikely to visit on her own. However, for reasons that have never been explained, the police did not find the boy's story to be entirely credible, even though the movements of the tracking dogs seemed to support it. All that being said, the description of the African-American driver did match the description of a former boyfriend of Tabitha's sister Jamie, and this man also happened to own a red car at that time. This boyfriend had previously lived in the Tudors' home, so he would have known the route Tabitha took to catch the school bus, and he had also gotten off work from his overnight job at 7 a.m. that morning. This man also apparently did not participate in the search efforts, but police have never found anything to link him to Tabitha's disappearance. It's worth noting that a lot of this info about the boyfriend was provided in a 2008 interview in Nashville scene with Johnny White, a friend of the Tudors family who also functions as their spokesman. The police have never officially commented on how they feel about the boyfriend as a potential suspect. Interestingly enough, Jamie Tuders had to face accusations that she protected her ex-boyfriend from being questioned and that she knew more about her sister's disappearance than she was letting on. The two sisters were known to squabble from time to time, and Jamie was in the house at the time Tabitha left for school, though Jamie always maintained she had not woken up yet and did not see her sister at all that morning. Even though Tabitha did not have a boyfriend, Jamie claimed that one investigator accused her of knowing about a secret boyfriend of Tabitha's and calling him to pick Tabitha up at the bus stop before she ran away. By her own admission, Jamie was administered 4 lie detector and stress tests from police and failed 3 of them, but claimed this was due to the intense pressure they exerted, as a detective allegedly told her that they would take her kids away if she did not pass the test. It was later clarified by one high-ranking police official that Jamie did not actually fail these 3 tests, but that the results were inconclusive. An intriguing clue turned up when a piece of paper was found in Tabitha's bedroom containing some initials in her handwriting, TDT-N-MTL. Of course, TDT likely stood for Tabitha Danielle Tuders, but at first, no one could figure out who the other initials might have belonged to or what the message might have meant. However, investigators did eventually find and question a boy Tabitha knew who had the initials MTL, and given that he was far too young to drive a car, police became satisfied that he had no involvement in her disappearance. Of course, there was fear that Tabitha could have struck up a secret relationship with a predator who subsequently abducted her. Since Tabitha was known for using computers at the local public library to log into chat rooms, investigators searched their logs to see if she might have met anyone online, but they uncovered no useful information. But sadly, there was no shortage of potential suspects, since Tabitha went missing in an area where a number of sex offenders happened to live. In fact, one couple who lived only a few houses down from the Tudors' residence were arrested for allegedly raping a minor only 2 weeks after Tabitha vanished. In June of that year, a registered sex offender named Millard Earl Smith was arrested for attempting to sexually assault a young boy who attended Tabitha's school. And in August, a man named Martin Tim Boyd was arrested after attempting to lure an 11-year-old girl into his vehicle only a few blocks away from Tabitha's home. Police also looked into a local maintenance worker who claimed that he saw Tabitha on the morning she went missing while driving a boy to school. However, the man's story seemed odd, since he would not have had any reason to drive through Tabitha's neighborhood during his route to school. And during an interview with reporters, this guy gave off more red flags by describing how Tabitha was developing physically. However, police could never find any evidence to connect any of these sketchy people to her disappearance. Another development took place on October 30th, when a truck driver reported seeing a girl matching Tabitha's description in Linton, Indiana. According to the witness, she was accompanied by an older man and an older teenage girl, and she looked quote-unquote anxious and afraid. A few weeks later, a Linton motel clerk reported that a man and 2 teenage girls had checked into his establishment on Halloween night, and he thought the younger girl might be Tabitha. However, since the motel had the man's name on file, investigators were able to track him down and confirm that neither the girls he had been seen with was Tabitha. Anyway, Beau and Debbie Tuders have always been pretty relentless about keeping their daughter's case in the spotlight. At one point, they even appeared on the Montel Williams show, but alas, it was used as an outlet for the notorious so-called psychic Sylvia Browne to tell the Tuders that Tabitha was no longer alive and her remains were buried in a field somewhere. And, well, you know how credible she is. In 2011, police received multiple tips that a young woman working as an escort in Las Vegas might be Tabitha, as she resembled her and even had some of the same marks and scars. They even went so far as to perform a DNA test on this woman, but it ruled her out as being Tabitha. Another interesting development occurred in 2014 when police announced that they had spoken to an eyewitness who saw Tabitha near a green Ford Mustang with a scorpion decal at the time of her disappearance. Apparently, there were always rumors that a schoolmate of Tabitha's had seen this, but he was never interviewed by police, and it was not until 11 years later that he finally came forward to share his account of what he saw. The plot thickened in February of 2016 when police released a mugshot of a man known only as Juan. In 2003, Juan was 19 years old and driving a red 1987 Honda Prelude before he was arrested on drug charges in September of that year. Even more interesting is that Juan apparently also owned a green car during that time period. The Tudors family claimed they did not recognize Juan, and even though investigators confirmed that he wasn't a suspect, they still wanted to talk to him in relation to Tabitha's disappearance. Strangely, even though they released his photograph, police have never revealed Juan's last name, and as far as I know, he has never come forward or been tracked down. That same year, country music singer Elizabeth Cook, a resident of East Nashville, released a track about the case on her new album titled Tabitha Tuders' Mama. The song was a tribute to Deborah Tuders, who has been forced to battle leukemia these past several years. Every year on April 29th, the Tuders family and their friends always hold a vigil for Tabitha at Bailey Middle School to commemorate the anniversary of her disappearance, and they intend to do so every single year until there is a resolution. While the case continues to remain unsolved, there has always been speculation about whether or not Tabitha's disappearance might be connected to another case involving a missing girl. In 2003, 11-year-old Heaven LaShae Ross, who went by the name Shae, lived in the Willowbrook Trailer Park in Northport, Alabama, alongside her mother Beth Lowry, her stepfather Kevin Thompson, and her 13-year-old sister Alex. On the morning of August 19th, Shae and Alex were both set to leave their trailer and make a 50-yard walk to the end of the street in order to catch the school bus. Alex left a few minutes ahead of Shae before Kevin Thompson asked Shae if she would like a ride to school. Shae said no and then left at 6:55 a.m. According to Kevin, within minutes, thunder and pouring rain hit the area, so he decided to leave to go pick up his two stepdaughters and drive them to school. Kevin left at 7:01 and drove down the street to the bus stop, but discovered that only Alex was waiting there and Shae had never arrived. Shae did not show up for school, and when no trace of her could be found, she was reported missing to the police. One neighbor did remember seeing Shae walk down the road past their trailer that morning, but another neighbor who lived 2 doors down did not, so the implication seemed to be that Shae was abducted during a very narrow window of time. Even though Northport was around 250 miles away from Nashville, investigators could not ignore the striking similarities between Shae's case and the disappearance of Tabitha Tuders. Both girls had gone missing while walking down the street to catch the school bus, and they both had light-colored hair and resembled each other. When Bo and Deborah Tuders learned about Shae's disappearance, they actually made the trip to Northport to participate in the search effort and support her family, believing that since so many people had volunteered their time to help them search for their daughter, they should return the favor. However, unlike Tabitha's case, there was a major falling out between Shae's family and the search volunteers, particularly after an incident where Shae's mother, Beth Lowry, accused the volunteers of stealing $500 which was donated by a local church. More suspicion started to be directed towards Shae's family when a fire broke out in her bedroom 1 month after she went missing, which destroyed most of Shae's personal possessions. Authorities deemed the fire to be suspicious, as it was only confined to the bedroom and did not cause damage to the rest of the home. They believe that the fire started in a small hole in the floor near the foot of Shae's bed, as a cigarette butt and trash were found in there, but Shae's family denied knowing that the hole even existed. There had been a bit of dysfunctional history in the family. In 2000, Shae had appeared as a witness in a domestic dispute involving her stepfather after Kevin threw her to the ground when she attempted to run for help. While Kevin was charged with harassment at the time, there was a reconciliation, and Kevin was still living with the family 3 years later. For their part, Kevin and Beth volunteered to take polygraph tests, and both passed. Beth always defended Kevin, claiming that he had a very close bond with Shae. Beth believed that she and her husband faced a lot of unjust scrutiny because they were an interracial couple living in a trailer park. On December 19, 2006, a man was walking his dog in a rural area 8 miles away from the Willowbrook Trailer Park, located just outside the town of Holt. The dog suddenly ran into the crawl space of an abandoned house, and when the man went after it, he discovered that skeletal remains were inside the crawl space, alongside a backpack with Shae's name on it. The remains were eventually identified as Heaven LaShae Ross. The area and house in which she was found were known for being a hotbed for drugs and prostitution, but to this day, the authorities have never released Shae's exact cause of death. In addition to Tabitha's case, investigators looked into the possibility that Shae's death might be connected to 2 other unsolved cases involving young girls. Within one 4-year period, 3 11-year-old girls had gone missing during the month of August from trailer parks in the southwest United States, which all happened to be located near U.S. Highway 82. On August 15, 1999, 11-year-old Teresa Dean vanished after last being seen walking down a street in a trailer park in Macon, Georgia, and she has still never been found. On August 16, 2001, an 11-year-old girl named Shannon Polk went missing while playing outside in a trailer park in Prattville, Alabama. 2 months later, her remains were discovered in a hunting area 10 miles away. In all 3 cases, construction had been going on in the area where the girls went missing, leading to speculation that they might have all been victims of a construction worker who was a serial killer. However, no evidence has ever conclusively linked these cases together. While Heaven LaShae Ross's disappearance did get a decent amount of publicity at the time it occurred, coverage has pretty much died down since her remains were found, and the case continues to remain unsolved. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. But before we continue, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, HelloFresh, as we are very grateful that they are supporting our show. In the past, the only type of cooking I ever wanted to do when I returned home was either shoving something into the microwave or just getting takeout. I mean, working on a podcast takes up a lot of time, so you don't want your meal preparation to provide a lot of unnecessary complications. But with HelloFresh, cooking becomes something you actually want to do when you get home from work. There are 3 plans to choose from: Classic, Veggie, and Family. I personally always go with the Classic option, and I've really enjoyed the meals HelloFresh has sent to me. In fact, the other night, after I got home from a long day at work, I prepared a delicious meal of maple glazed pork chops, accompanied by a sweet potato mash and garlicky green beans, and it was a cinch to put together. HelloFresh makes it so easy to cook delicious, balanced, filling dinners for a cost of less than $10 a meal and free shipping. You'll enjoy not having to plan dinner, spending money on takeout for an easy night, or worry about gathering ingredients. Hey, just because my podcast is called The Trail Went Cold does not mean I want my dinner that way. So to take advantage of our special offer and become a happy HelloFresh customer just like me, please visit hellofresh.com/cold30 and use the promo code COLD30 to get $30 off your first week of deliveries. Once again, that's hellofresh.com/cold30 and the promo code is COLD30. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of this episode. This is a very sad episode, as in total, we have discussed 4 unsolved cold cases involving young girls, which also took place within a window of 4 years. Overall, I do think it's probably a stretch that the same perpetrator was responsible for what happened to all 4 of these girls, though you can see a number of similarities between all of them. Tabitha Tuders' disappearance has gotten the most attention out of all these cases, but they definitely all deserve some sort of exploration. Now obviously, Tabitha and Shae's cases are the 2 which are most linked with each other, since they took place less than 4 months apart and have the closest similarities. If this was the work of a serial killer, then it's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility that after abducting Tabitha in Nashville, they would make the 250-mile journey to Northport to abduct another victim. But in both cases, there has been speculation that someone who personally knew Tabitha and Shae may have been responsible for what happened to them, which would seemingly rule out the possibility that the cases are connected. So for starters, I'm going to analyze Tabitha's case. The key difference is that Shae was found deceased, whereas Tabitha is still a missing person, and while there was initial speculation that Tabitha might have been a runaway, I'd say the chances of that are non-existent. By all accounts, Tabitha sounded like a very happy, kind-hearted girl who was close with her parents, excelled in school, and didn't seem to have any noticeable personal problems. But even if that were not the case, Tabitha did not take any possessions with her when she left the house that morning, other than her school supplies. She left money and clothing behind, so there's no indication that she had any plans of taking off. I mean, if there's no evidence of an abduction or a violent struggle, I do understand why the police at least have to acknowledge the possibility that the victim was a runaway. But once it becomes clear that the victim did not take anything with them when they disappeared, I really think the runaway theory should be ruled out very quickly. Sadly, the investigation was hampered by the fact that it was around 10 hours or so before Tabitha was actually reported missing, as she vanished early in the morning, and even though the school marked her absent, I'm not sure if they even tried to contact someone when she didn't show up. It's pretty unsettling that Tabitha's parents had to travel to the locked school themselves in the late afternoon and be let inside before anyone informed them about their daughter's absence that day. If someone with a perfect attendance record suddenly doesn't show up for school one morning and her parents never reported her absent, that should have set off some red flags. I know a lot of people have been critical about the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department's decision not to issue an Amber Alert for Tabitha, but they technically did follow proper procedure since there was no direct evidence of abduction. I think the big issue is that it sounds like the police chief at the time, Deborah Faulkner, refused to acknowledge any of her department's mistakes and even tried to shift blame to Beau and Deborah Tuders. Believe it or not, Chief Faulkner openly criticized them for taking 3 days to accurately describe what Tabitha was wearing the last time she was seen and providing them with outdated photographs. Not exactly a cool way to treat the stressed out parents of a missing child. Well, it does sound like the quality of the investigation improved when Faulkner was replaced as police chief in January of 2004, and the MNPD has been pretty diligent about keeping the case alive and pursuing every lead these past 14 years. Anyway, it seems to be a certainty that Tabitha was abducted while walking towards the bus stop that morning, and unfortunately, since she lived in an area which housed a number of sex offenders, there was quite a pool of potential suspects. I know there were some red flags when the note was found in Tabitha's room featuring her initials alongside the initials MTL. Since those initials did not immediately ring any bells for Tabitha's family, this opened up the possibility that she may have unknowingly become acquainted with a sexual predator named MTL. Perhaps Tabitha had made arrangements to meet this person that morning before he did her harm. However, the impression I get is that this note was nothing more than a red herring. Even though it doesn't look like police released specific details, it sounds like they were satisfied that MTL were the initials of a boy Tabitha knew who had no involvement in her disappearance. I also wouldn't put too much stock into the truck driver's sighting of Tabitha, which took place in Linton, Indiana 6 months later. Since Tabitha was in the company of an older man and another teenage girl, and was described as looking anxious and afraid, one could speculate that she was kidnapped and forced into prostitution, but I have my doubts that the girl in question was Tabitha. There was a very similar sighting of a man and 2 young girls at a motel in Linton the very next night, and that particular girl was ruled out as being Tabitha. While I'm not 100% certain these were the same people that the truck driver saw, I'd say there's a good chance they were, and that the truck driver was mistaken, which is sadly all too common with sightings in missing persons cases. Unfortunately, I'm inclined to believe that Tabitha was murdered a short time after she was abducted. Now, the biggest wildcard in this case is the alleged sighting of Tabitha climbing into a red car on the morning she disappeared. It's really hard to analyze this aspect of the case, since police have deliberately chosen to withhold information from the public, which is understandable, yet it leaves me with a number of questions. Of course, we have the account of the boy at the bus stop who claimed he saw Tabitha climbing into a red car with an African-American male, which matches the description of a former boyfriend of Tabitha's sister who was driving a red vehicle at that time. Yet for reasons unknown, it seems like police have questioned this boy's credibility. Now, it's easy to assume the boy's story has to be true because of the police tracking dogs, which traced Tabitha's scent to the middle of the hill on 14th Street before they suddenly turned around and headed uphill in the opposite direction. At first glance, this completely matches the boy's account of what happened. However, there's a complication here. I did some research on tracking dogs, and it looks like there's still a lot of debate in the field about whether they can actually trace a person's scent after they've gotten into a moving vehicle. I'm no expert in the field, so I'm just going to share this quote from the website caninetrainingacademy.com, provided by a veteran tracking and trailing dog instructor named Linda Porter. Quote, "Presently, I am not aware of any reliable or routine testing or certification process that supports a dog's proficiency in tracking a person inside a moving vehicle. Additionally, there are no definitive studies that I am aware of that validate or contradict this type of trail, nor am I aware of any current case law upholding this practice as reliable in court." End quote. So while this doesn't necessarily disprove the idea that Tabitha climbed into a moving vehicle, you also cannot say that the dogs turning around and tracing Tabitha's scent in the opposite direction proves the boy's story is true. I guess the alternate possibility is that Tabitha could have chosen to turn around at that particular spot on the hill and head in the opposite direction on foot, perhaps because she'd forgotten something at home. Her scent came to an end at an alley, a location she probably wouldn't have walked to on her own, but it's possible that someone could have lured or dragged her to that location. If there was a car parked there, the perpetrator could have forced Tabitha inside and driven away. If Tabitha had actually climbed into a vehicle on the hill, then I have no idea why the dogs would only trace her scent from there to the alley before they lost it. So would this mean the boy who said he saw Tabitha climb into the car was lying? I honestly have no idea. He did also provide a description of a driver which matched Tabitha's sister's former boyfriend. Did the boy know this guy personally and want to falsely accuse him for some reason? Well, without more information about the boyfriend, it's really hard to say. We don't really know any details about his relationship with Tabitha's sister, Jamie. Pretty much everything we know about this guy has been revealed to the public by the family's spokesman, Johnny White, but the police have chosen not to comment on this man, and I'm sure they have their reasons for doing so. Tabitha's parents have always said she would have never gotten into a car with someone unless it was a family member, but I'm not sure if she was comfortable enough with Jamie's boyfriend to do so. Of course, the other complicating factor is the second eyewitness account of Tabitha in a green Mustang with a scorpion decal. I know investigators never heard this story until over a decade after the fact, but they seem to find it credible enough to release it to the public. Now, I'm not sure if I'm reading too much into this, but most of the sources specifically state that Tabitha was seen near a green car, not that she was seen getting into a green car, so this might not necessarily mean that whoever drove this green car abducted her. Now, one of the strangest aspects of the investigation is the police's recent decision to release a mugshot for a man named Juan, whom they want to question about Tabitha's disappearance because he owned both a red and green car at that time. Since he was not named as a suspect, perhaps he was seen in Tabitha's vicinity that morning, even though she did not actually climb into his car. And given that the Tuders family didn't recognize Juan, it's doubtful that Tabitha would have gotten into a vehicle with him. The part which has always baffled me is that even though police were willing to publish Juan's photograph, they did not reveal his last name. Obviously, if the guy had a mugshot and a police record, then they obviously would have known what his last name was. Once again, I'm sure they probably have the reasons for this, but I honestly cannot think of another case where police released the photo and first name of a person of interest, but purposely withheld his last name. Whether Juan has any involvement or not, from what I can tell, he has still never spoken to police. So now we're going to transition into talking about Heaven LaShae Ross's death and its possible connection to Tabitha's case. Even though Tabitha's sister Jamie was accused of withholding information by investigators, I really do not believe she had any knowledge or involvement with Tabitha's disappearance, as she has always been a major advocate for her sister, runs a Tabitha Tuders Facebook page, and frequently keeps in contact with the lead detective on the case. But in Shae's case, there is a decent possibility that someone from her household might know more than they're telling, which, if true, would likely rule out the possibility about her death being connected to Tabitha. There has been some skepticism expressed about the story provided by Shae's stepfather, Kevin Thompson, who claimed that she left to walk to the bus stop before he decided to go pick her up once it started raining. He then discovered that Shae had vanished during a window of only about 6 minutes. However, the one thing which actually supports Kevin's story is that there was a neighbor who saw Shae walking down the street that morning, and a second neighbor who lived 2 doors down, but did not see Shae. Assuming these witnesses are accurate, this does seem to point to a scenario where someone abducted Shae in a vehicle and quickly drove out of the area during that very brief window of time. It does seem weird that no one would have seen anything, But let's look at how the scenario would have played out if Kevin was responsible. He lets Shae leave their home and walk down the street for a few minutes, where she is seen by a neighbor, but then, for reasons unknown, Kevin goes to grab Shae and takes her elsewhere before she can be seen by the neighbor living 2 doors down. This scenario would make more sense if the first neighbor had reported seeing Shae run down the street looking frightened or something, but that doesn't appear to be the case, so what would compel Kevin to go out and grab her like that? And then there's Shae's sister, Alex, who claimed that Kevin showed up at the bus stop at around 7:02 to ask where Shae was. Assuming that Alex isn't lying or attempting to cover for someone, then it just does not seem physically possible for Kevin to have been responsible for what happened to Shae. Yes, it does sound like Shae's family was a bit dysfunctional and had some issues in the past, and I can definitely see why people became suspicious of them after that strange fire broke out in Shae's room and destroyed her possessions. The fact that this fire seemed to originate from a hole in the floor containing trash and a cigarette butt makes it seem like it was started intentionally and may have been an attempt to destroy incriminating evidence. But if Shae's family started the fire and wanted to cover something up, then it seems strange that they would wait an entire month after she went missing to do so. And once again, we have a witness who could verify that Shae left her home and was walking down the street that morning, so did Kevin go pick her up, take Shae back to her bedroom to harm her in a fashion which left incriminating evidence behind, and then set a fire to destroy said evidence 1 month later? It just doesn't add up for me. Of course, I don't really have a logical explanation for how the fire started, but if Shae's family wasn't responsible, then perhaps the person who killed Shae was someone she knew, and they got some sadistic pleasure out of entering her bedroom and setting it on fire. Anyway, it was 3 years before Shae's remains were found, and the police have never released her exact cause of death, which I'm assuming is being done in order to weed out potentially false tips. The fact that they were found underneath an abandoned house, which was often used as a haven for criminal activity, leads me to believe that the perpetrator was familiar with that location. In spite of some suspicions about Shae's family, I lean towards them having no involvement in her death, and I believe she was most likely abducted by a predator that morning. So now we'll examine the possibility that Shae's death might be connected to the unsolved cases of Teresa Dean and Shannon Polk. It's hard to overlook 3 11-year-old girls being abducted from trailer parks in the middle of August within one 4-year period. And since there was construction in all 3 areas at that time, it's hard not to formulate a theory about the perpetrator being some sort of drifter who moves from job to job and doesn't stay in one location for very long, so he takes advantage of his profession to target young girls who happen to live in the vicinity of his construction jobs. Well, in Teresa Dean's case, I'm inclined to think what happened to her is not connected to the deaths of Shannon or Shae, because Macon, Georgia is located about 300 miles away, and there is a promising person of interest here, a man named Cody Landers, who happened to be the fiancé of Teresa's mother at that time. While there is no direct evidence pointing at him, Landers did fail a polygraph when questioned about Teresa's disappearance, and in October of 2000, he wound up being indicted on 7 child molestation charges involving 2 children and was imprisoned by the time Shannon and Shae were murdered. Now, Shannon Polk, she lived in the town of Prattville, Alabama, which is 90 miles away from Northport, so it's not out of the question that the same perpetrator could have been responsible for what happened to her and Shae. When you couple in Tabitha's disappearance, it might just be a coincidence that this many young girls happened to go missing under such similar circumstances within a 4-year period. I seriously doubt that the same perpetrator is responsible for what happened to all 4 of these victims, but it would not surprise me if at least 2 of these 4 cases might be connected in some way. Shae's death was the last of these crimes to occur, and assuming her stepfather wasn't responsible, I cannot overlook the fact that she was taken in such a narrow window of time without anybody seeing anything. That suggests to me that the perpetrator had experience with this sort of thing, and that Shae was not his first victim. I don't know. In spite of the fact that the 2 crimes took place in different states, I just cannot rule out the possibility that the same person might be responsible for what happened to Tabitha and Shae. But that is a pretty horrific thought, considering that Shae's remains were eventually found in the crawl space under an abandoned house. No girl deserves something like that, and it's sickening to think that the same thing might have happened to Tabitha, and that her remains might currently be in a similar location. Whatever happened, even though a number of potential suspects have been investigated, I am still leaning towards both these girls being abducted by someone who is yet to appear on the radar. Whether they were both abducted by the same person or not remains to be seen. Sadly, it doesn't look like Shae's case has gotten much play in the media these past several years. I don't know how widely known Tabitha's case is on a national level, but at the very least, the Nashville media is always giving it a lot of coverage and keeping her story in the spotlight whenever there's a new development. But both these girls, along with Teresa Dean and Shannon Polk, deserve justice and closure for their families. So if you happen to have any information on the unsolved disappearance of Tabitha Tuders, there is currently a $51,000 reward, so please contact Nashville Crime Stoppers at 615-74-CRIME. That's 615-742-7463. And should you happen to have any information on the unsolved deaths of Heaven LaShae Ross and Shannon Polk, or the disappearance of Teresa Dean, please contact the appropriate authorities. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Anyway, like I mentioned earlier, The Trail Went Cold has just been launched on Patreon, so if you have a moment, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat exclusive bonus rewards. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank some more of our listeners who have signed up to support us on Patreon. As you might know, I've been giving shoutouts to our patrons in increments of 20, and I'm almost caught up. But if you haven't heard your name get mentioned yet, rest assured that you will get a shoutout very soon. Anyway, this week I would like to send my thanks to Shantanya L., Bob M., Matt F., John A., Jen F., Carol C., Alyssa H., Anna, Laura Lee W., Sandy G., Frank B., Tina F., Nika P., Sarah G., Heather Ann K., Me Rowe, Clinton R., Charlie W., Jules C., and the We Just Nerd Here podcast. Thank you so much to everyone for your generosity. And I also want to make one more special announcement. I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but in addition to CrimeCon, I'm going to be appearing at another podcasting get-together in my native country called a Canadian Crime Podcast event, which is taking place in Toronto on Sunday, July 22nd at a bar called The Hideout on 423 College Street. I will be joined by Christy Lee of Canadian True Crime, Jordan Bonaparte of the Nighttime Podcast, and Jack Luna of Dark Topic, and there will also be some other special guests. It runs from 5 until 8 p.m., and will be a casual meetup followed by a panel discussion and Q&A. Tickets are $10 each, and are now available for sale at eventbrite.ca. You can find a direct link to purchase tickets in our episode description, and for more information, please visit our social media pages. I also just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide my thanks to McGill Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. And we also have a Facebook discussion group if you would like to discuss these cases or true crime in general with myself and your fellow listeners. So as you well know, just 2 days after the release of this episode, I'm going to be attending CrimeCon at the Gaylord Opryland Hotel in Nashville. I will be appearing on Podcast Row throughout the course of the weekend, so if any of you happen to be at the event, feel free to come visit my booth and say hi, because I would love to meet you. I got to meet so many wonderful listeners at CrimeCon last year, and I hope to meet even more of you this time around. Also, this coming Friday, May 4th, myself and several other podcasters will be holding a meetup for listeners at 8 p.m. at the Gaylord Opryland's Fuse Sports Bar. So if you feel like hanging out with us, having a drink, and discussing true crime, feel free to join us. Anyway, this weekend is sure to be a blast, and I'm greatly looking forward to it, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled on our social media, where I will be providing constant updates. So even if you can't join me at CrimeCon, be sure to have yourself a great week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new post-CrimeCon episode of The Trail went cold.